"Clean it up," he says with a smug grin after kicking a 50-pound sack of feed at her feet, but he freezes when she reaches for a pair of handcuffs instead of a shovel. The farmhand, Jed, looks her up and down. "Figured you needed something to do since you can't keep up with the men." He spits on the ground an inch from her boot. What he doesn't see is her cold, calculating gaze, the way she isn't looking at the spilled feed, but at the chemical stains on his boots and the tire tracks his truck left in the dirt. He thinks he's humiliating her. He has no idea she's just gathering the last piece of evidence she needs. This story is about the moment justice finally comes for those who think they're untouchable. If you believe no one is above the law, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss how this unfolds. And comment below with the city you're watching from and the word justice if you're ready for what happens next. Now let's get back to the facts. This story begins 2 months ago, deep in the heart of Texas, at the Oak Valley Ranch, a massive spread with thousands of cattle and a spotless reputation, at least on the surface. Our main character is Maya Davis, a 32-year-old black woman who, to everyone there, was just another cowgirl trying to make a living. Strong, quiet, and efficient, she did her work without complaint, which seemed to irritate some of the long-time hands, especially Jed. Jed was the ranch manager's son, an arrogant 28-year-old who believed the ranch was his personal playground. From Maya's first day, he'd singled her out, with pranks that bordered on sabotage and racist, misogynistic comments disguised as ranch jokes. But Maya wasn't just any cowgirl. She was Officer Maya Davis, an undercover agent with the Texas Environmental Police. For over a year, anonymous tips had been pointing to Oak Valley Ranch. Reports of illegal chemical dumping, contamination of the local water table, and wildlife dying off in the area. The ranch's owner, a powerful man with deep political connections, always managed to quash any formal investigation. Maya's mission was clear: infiltrate, gather irrefutable evidence, and expose the truth behind the model ranch facade. The challenge was doing it without blowing her cover, all while enduring the constant harassment from men like Jed. The tension was building. Maya had already collected soil samples near a creek at the back of the property, where the water had an oily sheen and a faint chemical smell. She'd also noted that certain areas of the vast ranch were strangely off-limits, even to employees. Jed, in his attempt to intimidate her, often followed her, not knowing he was actually leading her closer to his secrets. Every insult, every act of humiliation, was a mistake that brought him closer to his own downfall. She knew his arrogance would be his undoing. He saw her as a weak, helpless victim in his world. But what happens when the predator discovers his prey was the hunter all along? Oak Valley Ranch was a microcosm of the Old West, stuck in time. The men worked hard and said little, unless it was to assert dominance. The manager, Jed's father, was a man named Bill. He was tough, sun-beaten, and ran the ranch with an iron fist. Bill saw the world in simple terms: insiders and outsiders. Maya was an outsider. He never confronted her directly, but his silent approval of Jed's actions was obvious. He let his son run wild, perhaps seeing his cruelty as an extension of his own authority. For Bill, the ranch and its secrets were more important than any law or morality. The other cowhands fell into two camps. Most just kept their heads down and avoided trouble. They saw what Jed did, heard the comments, but they had families to feed and weren't about to risk their jobs by confronting the boss's son. One or two seemed to feel a shred of sympathy for Maya, offering a supportive nod when Jed wasn't looking, but they never dared to intervene. Their silence was its own form of poison, allowing the toxicity to fester. Their inaction made them complicit, a fact that weighed on Maya as she navigated the social landscape. There was one, however, who was different. Hector, a leathery old hand in his late 60s, had worked at the ranch longer than anyone, even Bill. He was quiet by nature, not by fear. Maya noticed he watched everything. He watched Jed with a look of weary disapproval. He watched Maya with a sharp, inquisitive eye, as if he sensed she was more than she appeared. He never spoke to her beyond a simple morning, but he had a habit of showing up just when Jed's harassment was about to cross a line, his silent presence enough to make Jed back off. Hector knew the ranch's history, its land, and its secrets. He was a potential ally, but also a risk. His loyalty was to the ranch itself, and Maya didn't yet know if that loyalty included its dark underbelly. The environment itself was a character in this drama. The creek Maya was investigating was the lifeblood of the valley. feeding into the river that supplied the small town downstream. She'd read the reports before going undercover, stories of sick livestock from neighboring farms, of a fishing spot that was now barren. The off-limits area was a large fenced-off section of badlands at the northern edge of the property. The official story was that the land was unstable, prone to rock slides, but Maya had seen tire tracks leading to and from the gate late at night. She'd smelled something acrid on the wind coming from that direction, a smell that was nothing like cattle or dirt. The land itself was showing symptoms of the crime. Jed and his father weren't just poisoning the water, they were poisoning their own legacy, destroying the very land they claimed to cherish. Every day, Maya felt the weight of the people downstream who were unknowingly drinking that water, the pressure mounting as Jed's provocations became more brazen, pushing her closer to the truth. The conflict escalated from psychological warfare to physical danger. It happened a week after Maya had successfully bagged a water sample from the Forbidden Creek. She must have been spotted. There was no other explanation for Jed's sudden shift in tactics. The casual taunts and accidents weren't enough for him anymore. He needed to either break her or run her off the ranch for good. The scene was set near a holding pen for a half-dozen bulls, massive, unpredictable animals that even seasoned hands treated with extreme caution. The task was simple: repair a section of broken fence. It was a two-person job, but Jed assigned it to Maya alone. "Hector called in sick," he'd said with a liar's smile. "Show us you can handle it." Maya started the work, her senses on high alert. The air was thick with tension. The other hands kept their distance, busying themselves with tasks on the far side of the corral. They knew something was wrong. Jed stood by the main gate, arms crossed, watching her. He wasn't just supervising, he was waiting. As Maya was bent over, tensioning a line of wire, she heard it, the distinct sound of a latch being quietly unfastened. It wasn't the gate to the main corral, but the one to the small adjacent pen where they kept a notoriously aggressive Charolais bull named Loco. Her head snapped up. The gate was swinging open. The bull, a ton of white muscle and fury, blinked in the bright sun, its head lowering as it spotted the lone figure in its path. There was no time for thought, only instinct. Years of police training kicked in, overriding any pretense of being an ordinary cowgirl. She didn't scream or scramble away. In one fluid motion, she dropped her tools and vaulted sideways over the very fence she'd been repairing, landing with a light thud on the other side, just as the bull charged past, its horns gouging deep furrows in the post where she'd been standing a second before. The sheer speed and agility of her movement was unnatural for a farmhand. It was the precise economic movement of an athlete or an officer. Jed's jaw went slack. He had expected panic, a desperate scramble, maybe a serious injury that would put her out of commission. He had not expected that. He quickly tried to recover his composure, striding over to the now closed latch. "Damn thing must have come loose," he yelled, his voice a little too loud. "You all right?" Maya stood up, brushing the dust from her jeans. She didn't answer him. She just looked at him, her eyes burning with an intensity that made him take an involuntary step back. The fear was gone from her face, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. In that moment, the power dynamic shifted. He saw it. The other hands, who had stopped working to watch, saw it too. She hadn't just dodged a bull, she had exposed his intent. The accident was a clear attempt to cause her serious harm. The conflict was no longer a one-sided campaign of harassment. It was now a direct confrontation, and she had just proven she was far more capable than he had ever imagined. The investigation was no longer just about the environment, it was now about attempted assault. The bull incident sent ripples through the ranch. The fragile peace was broken. Jed's smug confidence was replaced by a wary, venomous anger. He knew Maya knew it was deliberate, and her survival and fearless gaze had turned his failed attack into a public humiliation. The other hands now looked at her differently, with a mix of fear and newfound respect. They gave her a wider berth, their conversations halting whenever she drew near. The most significant change came from Hector. 2 days after the incident, as Maya was checking the tack in the stables, he approached, his movements casual. He didn't look at her, instead focusing on polishing a saddle. "That bull Loco," he said, his voice low and raspy. "He's got a temper, but he ain't ever accidentally gotten out of that pen before. Not in the 5 years since Bill bought him." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Bill, he wasn't always like this. Before his wife passed, before the money from that big land sale, he was a good man. Now, he only cares about the ranch, protects it, and Jed. Maya continued her work, not acknowledging his statement directly, but she listened. "Be careful around that north section," Hector added, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The ground out there is sour. Some things once buried don't like to be dug up." He gave her a final, meaningful look, then picked up his saddle and walked away, leaving Maya alone in the quiet stable. The warning was clear. Hector knew something was happening in the northern Badlands, and while he wouldn't interfere directly, he had just confirmed her suspicions and given her a target. The pressure on Maya intensified from the outside too. Her handler, a man named Marcus, was getting anxious. "The DA is getting cold feet, Maya," he said over their encrypted channel that night. "The evidence is thin. Water samples can be explained away. We need something solid, something that links the dumping directly to the ranch's ownership." A new complication had arisen. The owner of Oak Valley, the powerful and reclusive Mr. Thompson, was scheduled for his annual inspection visit in 1 week. If he arrived and found anything amiss, he could shut down the illegal operation, bury the evidence for good, and Maya's entire investigation would be for nothing. The ticking clock was now deafening. She had 7 days to find a smoking gun. The subplots were now dangerously intertwined. Jed's personal vendetta against her meant he was watching her every move. Bill's paranoid protection of the ranch's secrets made any misstep potentially fatal. Hector's cryptic warning was both a guide and a reminder of the ranch's dark history, and the impending arrival of the owner meant her window of opportunity was closing fast. Maya was walking a tightrope, and the winds were picking up from all directions. The night of the storm was Maya's chance. A fierce Texas thunderstorm rolled in, the kind that turns the sky black and the ground to mud. The wind howled, rattling the bunkhouse windows, and heavy rain fell in blinding sheets. It was the perfect cover. While the other hands were hunkered down, playing cards and drinking, Maya slipped out, clad in dark, rain-proof gear. Her destination, the forbidden northern section. Cutting through the wire fence was easier than she expected. The posts were old and rusted. She moved quickly, using the flashes of lightning to navigate the treacherous, rocky terrain. Hector's words echoed in her mind. "The ground out there is sour." He was right. Even with the rain washing everything clean, the chemical smell was stronger here, sharp and sickening. After a 10-minute hike, she found it. It was a massive, excavated pit, a crude landfill carved into the earth. The lightning flashed, illuminating a nightmare. Dozens, maybe hundreds of 55-gallon drums were piled haphazardly, many of them leaking a dark, viscous substance that mingled with the rainwater and flowed in oily rivulets toward the creek. It was far worse than she'd imagined. This wasn't just careless pesticide runoff. This was a full-blown illegal toxic waste dump. She immediately began documenting the scene with a high-resolution, low-light camera, capturing the barrel markings, the scale of the pit, everything. This was the smoking gun Marcus needed. But then she saw something else. Tucked away at the far end of the pit, nearly swallowed by a mudslide, was the mangled front end of a vehicle. It was an old pickup truck, rusted and crushed, clearly having been buried here along with the barrels. Her heart hammered in her chest. This was wrong. This wasn't just a dump site. It was a graveyard. Fighting the mud and the driving rain, she made her way to the truck. The cab was crushed, but she managed to pry the glove compartment open. Inside, preserved in a plastic bag, were the vehicle's registration and an old insurance card. The name on the documents was Daniel Peterson. Maya froze, the rain dripping from her face. Daniel Peterson. She knew that name. She pulled out her discreet satellite phone, shielding it from the rain, and ran the name through the police database. The result came back in seconds, a cold knot forming in her stomach. Daniel Peterson, age 42, reported missing 18 months ago. He was a former Oak Valley employee who had been fired after a dispute with Bill. He was also, according to the case file, the source of the original anonymous tips to the environmental police. The entire case transformed in that instant. This was no longer just about environmental crimes, it was about murder. Jed and his father weren't just polluters who had cut corners to save money. They were killers who had silenced a whistleblower by burying him with the evidence. Maya looked from the phone in her hand to the dark earthen tomb around her. The mission was no longer about fines or prison sentences. It was about bringing a killer to justice, and she was standing in the middle of his dumping ground. The moment Maya transmitted her findings, the nature of the operation changed. Marcus's voice on the other end of the line was strained, urgent. "Murder changes everything, Maya. This is out of our hands now. The Texas Rangers are taking lead. Your cover is blown. I'm ordering you to pull out now." "Negative," Maya said, her voice firm, cutting through the static. "If I leave now, they'll know. Bill and Jed will see the disturbed ground, the cut fence. They'll sanitize this place before the Rangers can even get a warrant. All this evidence, Peterson, it'll all be gone for good. It's too dangerous, officer. We have what we need to start." "No, we don't," she countered, her voice low but intense. "We have a body in a dump, but we don't have the weapon. We can't tie it to them directly without a confession or a witness. I'm staying. I'm getting what we need." The line was silent for a moment. She knew she was being insubordinate, but pulling out now felt like a betrayal to the man buried in the mud. "I can provoke Jed," she continued. "He's arrogant and volatile. I can make him slip up. Give me until the owner arrives. 48 hours. After a tense pause, Marcus reluctantly agreed. 48 hours, Maya. Then we're coming in, with or without your signal." The next morning, the atmosphere at the ranch was a pressure cooker. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world of clean, damp air and thick mud. Bill and Jed were on edge. Maya saw them drive out towards the northern section in their ATV, their faces grim. They had seen the cut fence. They knew someone had been there. Their gazes followed Maya everywhere she went, but the contempt was gone, replaced by a sharp, paranoid fear. They were no longer trying to intimidate a cowgirl. They were trying to identify a threat. Hector's reaction was the most telling. He saw the mud caked deep in the treads of Maya's work boots, mud that could only have come from the Badlands. He saw the new, hard-edged determination in her eyes. That afternoon he found her by the water troughs. He didn't speak, but he pushed a small, heavy object wrapped in an oily rag into her hand. Found this in Peterson's locker after they fired him. Figured his family might want it. It was a small, personal voice recorder. Maya's heart leaped. Was it the final piece of the puzzle? The dynamic had shifted entirely. Maya was no longer the sole hunter. Bill and Jed were now hunting her, even as she laid her own trap. And Hector, the silent observer, had finally chosen a side. The new challenge was stark. Survive for 48 hours while being actively hunted by two killers. The game of cat and mouse was over. This was now a predator versus predator standoff. Maya's personal growth was no longer internal. It became her armor. The passive, quiet cowgirl persona was shed like a skin. She began to move with the crisp, efficient confidence of a police officer. Her posture straightened. Her gaze became direct and challenging, and she no longer avoided confrontation. Her transformation was most visible in her interactions with Jed. The next day, while the hands were gathered for morning assignments, she made her move. "Tough storm last night," she said, her voice carrying across the yard, looking directly at Jed. "Storms are funny things. They can wash away a lot, but sometimes they uncover things that are supposed to stay buried deep." A flicker of panic crossed Jed's face before he masked it with a scowl. The other hands shifted uncomfortably. Maya was no longer a target. She was a threat. She listened to the recorder Hector had given her. It contained only one file, a crackly, 10-second recording of Daniel Peterson's voice, clearly in a heated argument. "Don't care what your father says, Bill. This is wrong. People will get sick. I'm going to the authorities." The audio cut off abruptly. It was damning, but not definitive. It was proof of the confrontation, but not the murder. Maya knew she had to use it to force their hand. Her plan was an active hunt. She chose her ground carefully, the stables, a large open structure with plenty of cover, but also only two main exits. That afternoon, knowing Jed was nearby, she stood in the main walkway and pretended to be on a call using her satellite phone. She spoke in low, coded words, but made sure certain phrases were audible. "Yeah, I have the recording." Peterson's voice. "No, I'm not going to the police yet. A journalist I know is very interested. He'll pay well for this kind of corporate malfeasance story, especially with Mr. Thompson's visit tomorrow." It was the perfect bait. She had mentioned the evidence, the victim's name, and the threat of public exposure right before the owner's arrival. She was forcing them to act tonight. She saw Jed slip away from the corral, his face pale with rage and fear. He was going to his father. The trap was set. She wasn't waiting for them to come for her in the dark of the bunkhouse. She was making them confront her on her terms, in a place she had prepared. Her evolution was complete. She was no longer just gathering evidence. She was dictating the final, decisive confrontation. The cowgirl was gone, and Officer Davis was in control. The sun bled out of the sky, leaving bruised purple and orange clouds in its wake. The ranch grew quiet, the sounds of the day replaced by the chirping of crickets and the low hum of a distant generator. Inside the stables, the air was thick with the smell of hay, leather, and impending violence. Maya wasn't hiding. She was waiting in ambush. She had chosen a spot in the deep shadows of an empty stall, giving her a clear view of the main entrance and multiple routes for cover or escape. The small, heavy service pistol holstered under her jacket felt like a familiar weight. She was no longer a cowgirl. She was an officer preparing for a high-risk takedown. Her focus was absolute, her senses cataloging every sound. The creak of the stable's tin roof in the wind, the soft snort of a horse in a nearby stall, a floorboard groaning upstairs in the hayloft. She methodically suppressed the adrenaline, slowing her breathing, letting the cold calm of her training take over. This wasn't about revenge for the taunts or the humiliation. It was about justice for Daniel Peterson and a calculated operation to apprehend two dangerous felons. Just as darkness consumed the last light, a figure emerged from the shadows near the tack room. It was Hector. He moved silently, his old body not making a sound. He stopped 10 feet from her position, as if he knew exactly where she was. He didn't look at her. "Heard Bill sent the other hands out to the south pasture," Hector said, his voice a low rumble. "Something about a downed fence. It's a lie. He's clearing the area." He paused, then took a step closer. "Jed's a hothead, all rage and fists. But Bill, he's the cold one. He thinks. He plans. He keeps a loaded rifle in a spring mount under the desk in his office. Don't turn your back on him. Not for a second." It was the final piece of intel she needed. "Thank you, Hector," Maya said softly from the shadows. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Peterson was a good man. He had kids. Without another word, Hector slipped back into the darkness and was gone. His role was over. He had given her the warning and cleared the stage. The rest was up to her. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Maya ran through the scenarios in her head. Jed charging, Bill flanking, both at once. She visualized her responses, her movements, her lines of fire. Then the sound she'd been waiting for, the crunch of heavy boots on the gravel outside. A truck door slammed shut with unnerving finality. The sound of two distinct sets of footsteps approached the stable entrance, one heavy and enraged, the other slow and deliberate. The final confrontation had arrived. The large stable doors slid open with a groan, silhouetting two figures against the dim yard lights. Jed stormed in first, a heavy tire iron gripped in his white-knuckled fist, his eyes scanning the shadows with wild fury. Bill followed, closing the doors behind them, plunging the stables into near-total darkness, save for the dusty shafts of moonlight cutting through the high windows. Bill was calm, his movements methodical, which made him infinitely more dangerous. "You've been a busy little girl," Bill said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Hey, it's over, Bill." Maya's voice shot out from the darkness, clear and steady. She stepped out from behind a large stack of hay bales, positioning herself in the center of the main walkway. She didn't draw her weapon. Not yet. Jed let out a roar of pure rage. You think you can come to our home and—" He didn't finish the sentence, instead lunging at her, swinging the tire iron in a vicious arc. It was exactly the reckless, predictable attack she expected. Maya sidestepped with fluid grace, one hand shooting out to push his already unbalanced body forward. Jed stumbled, crashing headlong into a pile of empty feed sacks, the tire iron clattering on the concrete floor. He was out of the fight, if only for a moment. Maya's attention snapped back to Bill, but the older man hadn't moved. He hadn't gone for a weapon. He was just staring at his son, who was coughing and sputtering in a cloud of dust. Bill's face wasn't angry. It was a mask of profound, soul-crushing disappointment. The plausible twist wasn't an external event. It was the breaking of a man's soul. "You see?" Bill said, his voice cracking. He wasn't speaking to Jed. He was speaking to Maya. "You see what I've been dealing with? This is what I've been trying to protect. Not the ranch, not the money. Him, my stupid, worthless, hot-headed son." In that moment, the dam of Bill's composure broke and a torrent of confession poured out. Peterson threatened to expose us. Jed couldn't take it. He confronted him out by the creek, hit him with a rock. Bill's gaze was distant, reliving the horror. Jed came to me crying, panicking. He didn't mean to kill him, he just snapped like he always does. He finally looked at Maya, his eyes hollow. What was I supposed to do? Let my boy go to prison for a single mistake? I did what any father would do. I cleaned it up. I buried the body, the truck, everything. The barrels were just a business that got out of hand, a way to pay for all the silence. Recovering, Jed scrambled to his feet. He couldn't comprehend his father's confession. All he knew was his own humiliation. In a final, pathetic act of dominance, he grabbed a full 50-pound sack of feed. "How you think you've won?" he snarled at Maya, heaving the sack and dumping it at her feet. "Clean it up." The dust settled. This was the moment, the ultimate attempt to put her back in her place. Maya didn't even glance at the spilled grain. She looked straight at the broken father. "He's right, Bill," she said, her voice like steel. "It's time for a cleanup." In one smooth, practiced motion, she pulled her jacket aside, revealing the badge clipped to her belt. With her other hand, she drew her pistol, holding it in a firm, two-handed grip. "Officer Maya Davis, Texas Environmental Police. You're both under arrest for the illegal disposal of hazardous materials and the murder of Daniel Peterson." Jed froze, his mouth hanging open, his mind unable to process the badge, the gun, the woman who was supposed to be his victim now holding all the power. Bill didn't look surprised. He just looked tired. He slumped onto a nearby hay bale, the fight completely gone from him. A man defeated not by the law but by the devastating failure of his own son. Within 30 minutes, the quiet ranch was transformed into a flood of flashing red and blue lights. Texas Ranger vehicles and environmental police trucks streamed down the long gravel driveway, their tires crunching over the ground where Jed had tried to assert his dominance. The confrontation was over, and the consequences had arrived. A forensics team in white hazmat suits descended on the northern section, their powerful floodlights turning the gruesome burial pit into a stark, clinical crime scene. They carefully excavated the barrels and the rusted shell of Daniel Peterson's truck, their work methodical and grim. Justice, it turned out, was a slow, patient, and dirty job. Jed did not go quietly. He screamed, cursed, and thrashed as two burly rangers cuffed him, his rage and disbelief echoing across the yard. He blamed Maya. He blamed his father. He blamed everyone but himself until a ranger firmly pushed his head down and forced him into the back of a patrol car. In contrast, Bill was silent. He sat where he had slumped in the stables, his hands cuffed in front of him, looking like a hollowed-out version of the powerful man he had once been. He didn't resist. He simply stared into the darkness, a man imprisoned by his own choices long before the handcuffs were snapped on. Maya stood near the main house, briefing the lead ranger, a tall, stern man with a respectful gaze. She handed over the small digital recorder and a drive containing the evidence she had collected. Her voice was calm and professional, recounting the events with precision, her role as an undercover operative complete. Her handler Marcus arrived and walked over, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. "The DA's not getting cold feet anymore," he said, a rare smile on his face. "You did what an entire task force couldn't. Good work, officer." The news broke the next day. The scandal of the Oak Valley Ranch was spectacular. Mr. Thompson, the powerful owner, was arrested and charged with criminal negligence and conspiracy. His political connections evaporated overnight. The story dominated the headlines for weeks. The poisoned water, the corrupt ranch management, and the heroic undercover officer who exposed it all. For the small town downstream, the arrests brought relief and the promise of a federal cleanup operation. For the family of Daniel Peterson, it brought a tragic, long overdue closure. Maya didn't stay to see all the fallout. As the sun rose, casting a clean golden light over the valley, her work there was done. She hadn't just survived, she had dismantled an entire criminal enterprise and brought a murderer to justice. 6 months later, the dust had settled, both literally and figuratively. The story of the cowgirl cop had become a minor legend in Texas law enforcement, a testament to courage and resilience. Maya Davis stood on a stage in Austin, wearing her crisp dress uniform, the light glinting off the commendation for valor being pinned to her chest. She looked out at the audience, her expression calm and composed. She saw Marcus in the front row, and further back, she saw 2 teenagers and a woman she recognized from a photograph as Daniel Peterson's wife and children. The woman gave her a small, tearful nod of gratitude. Maya returned it with a look of solemn respect. Later that day, She stood on a bridge overlooking the Colorado River as it flowed cleanly through the city. Her phone buzzed. It was Marcus. "Enjoying the desk job?" he asked, his voice full of sarcasm. "You know I'm not," she replied, a faint smile touching her lips. "Good, because I've got a file here you might find interesting. A string of chemical processing plants on the Gulf Coast, reports of birth defects in a nearby fishing community, and local officials who refuse to investigate. It's a long shot, and it's dangerous." Maya watched a boat cut a clean wake through the water below. The fight was never truly over. One victory didn't solve everything. It just gave you the strength for the next one. She felt the familiar pull, the sense of purpose that drove her. The world was full of dark, hidden places where people needed a champion. "Send me the file," she said. As for Hector, no one at the ranch saw him again. The day after the arrests, he packed a single bag, collected his final paycheck, and drove his old truck down the gravel road for the last time, disappearing into the Texas horizon. He had done the right thing, and that was all that mattered. The story of Maya Davis shows that courage and determination can bring the truth to light, no matter how deep it's buried. She faced down prejudice and violence to get justice for Daniel Peterson and an entire community that was being silently poisoned. Her strength is an inspiration to us all. If you watched until the end and believe in the power of justice, let us know in the comments by writing "I watched until the end." We want to know what part of Maya's journey impacted you the most. Was it the moment she faced down the bull, or the final tense confrontation in the stables? Your engagement helps us bring more powerful stories like this to you.